Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya.
So if you really try to put yourself in the mindset of, someone living 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, you kind of have to throw out your entire modern understanding of the world.
Oh, completely. Yeah, you have to start from scratch.
Right, because it's so easy for us to look at ancient history as just a collection of dusty ruins and broken pottery locked behind museum glass. But for the people actually living back then, the landscape wasn't just old stones.
No, it was a world of absolute awe and terror, really.
Exactly. They were navigating a reality where they genuinely believed they were sharing the earth with colossal, terrifying titans.
And, that belief wasn't just some fringe conspiracy theory of the ancient world. The imagination of these ancient societies wasn't solely focused on distant gods up in the heavens.
Right. They thought these things were walking around right next to them.
Exactly. It was intensely focused on colossal beings physically walking the earth alongside them. And when you look at the historical record, it is a remarkably consistent theme across cultures that had entirely different languages, geographies, and belief systems.
Which perfectly brings us to the core mystery of this deep dive. Today, we are exploring the ancient world's universal obsession with giants and this pervasive concept of the big men.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It really is. And to figure out why everyone from ancient Israel to Mesopotamia was obsessed with giants, we're pulling from a pretty wild mix of evidence today. We are going to connect the mysterious biblical Nephilim, the mighty Sumerian king Gilgamesh, and the towering warrior Goliath.
A really heavy-hitting lineup.
Truly the heavyweights.
Yep.
And we're using everything from the Dead Sea Scrolls and ancient Mesopotamian literature to the physical excavated dirt of Goliath's hometown to see how these myths weave into a single massive tapestry of human history. We've got encyclopedic entries, archaeological reports from the Biblical Archaeology Society, and insights from the Malamu Project.
It really is an incredible cross-section of evidence because when you start comparing the theological text with the actual archaeological reports, or those cross-cultural studies you mentioned, you stop seeing these stories as as isolated fairy tales.
Right. They start to mean something much bigger.
Exactly. You start seeing a profound, universal human attempt to explain the brutal realities of power, genetics, and monumental architecture.
So let's start with the ultimate ancient mystery, the one that probably sparked a lot of people's fascination with this topic to begin with, the Nephilim.
Yes, the classic.
Right. If you grew up around certain religious traditions, or even if you just enjoy late-night history documentaries, that name probably rings a bell.
It definitely has a pop culture footprint now.
Oh, for sure. So the foundation of this entire concept sits right in the book of Genesis, chapter 6. Just a few verses before the story of Noah's Ark. The text describes this incredibly cryptic event where the sons of God come down to the daughters of men and have children with them.
Right.
And these offspring are the Nephilim described as the mighty men of old, the men of renown.
And I should point out, it remains one of the most debated, really enigmatic passages in the entire Hebrew Bible. You are dealing with an incredibly brief mention of a union between the divine, which is often interpreted as angels or watchers, and the mortal.
Just a total boundary violation.
Exactly. The result of this crossing of boundaries is a race of beings that are immediately flagged as having extraordinary status. But what's crucial to understand is that the text itself originally emphasizes their fame and their might, not necessarily their physical height.
Wait, really? Because height is always the first thing people think of.
I know, but the obsession with their towering physical size is an interpretation that gets layered on over time.
Okay, but that size aspect definitely gets cemented later in the biblical text, right?
Okay.
There's this visceral story in the book of Numbers, chapter 13.
Oh, the spies.
Yeah. Moses sends 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan. And 10 of those spies come back absolutely paralyzed by fear. They report that they saw the Anakim there, who are specifically described as descendants of the Nephilim.
Right, they draw a direct genealogical line.
And the spies tell Moses, we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. I've always thought of this as the grasshopper effect.
I like that, the grasshopper effect.
Because it's one thing to report back that an enemy army is, well-trained or heavily armed. It's a completely different psychological state to say you felt like a literal insect standing next to them.
That intense psychological reaction is exactly why the interpretation of the Nephilim began to shift. If we drill down into the etymology of the word Nephilim, the mechanics of the language are surprisingly ambiguous.
How so?
Well, most linguists and scholars trace the word back to the Hebrew root NPL, which translates simply to fall.
Okay.
So strictly grammatically, it could mean the fallen ones, or if you read it in an active sense, it could mean those who cause others to fall, referring to fierce, brutal warriors who just strike down their enemies in battle.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, inherently, the root word has absolutely nothing to do with physical height.
Wait, so if the root word just means fallen warriors or those who strike people down, how on earth did we arrive at the image of a 40-foot-tall monster stomping around the ancient Near East?
It essentially comes down to a centuries-long game of historical telephone, and it was specifically driven by translation. The turning point really happens with the Septuagint.
Which is the Greek translation, right?
Exactly. It's the earliest Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, composed around the 3rd or 2nd century BC. When these Hellenistic Jewish scholars encountered the Hebrew word Nephilim, they had to find a Greek equivalent that captured the cultural weight of the term. So they chose the Greek word gigantes.
And obviously, gigantes is where we get the English word giant.
Exactly, but we have to contextualize what gigantes meant to a Greek-speaking audience at that specific time.
Right, it wouldn't mean the same thing it means to us.
No, not at all. In Greek mythology, the gigantes weren't just tall people. They were a specific mythological, race-chaotic, violent beings born from the earth who possessed an ambiguous identity somewhere between human and divine.
Oh, so they were matching the vibe, not the physical description.
Precisely. Crucially, the gigantes were a direct threat to the established order of the gods. The translators recognize a deep thematic resonance there. Both the biblical Nephilim and the Greek gigantes were boundary crossers connected to violence, ancient chaos, and rebellion.
That makes a lot of sense.
But over the centuries, the rich mythological nuance of that Greek translation eroded. By the time you get to later medieval translations, readers just took the word literally to mean beings of immense, towering physical height.
Which perfectly explains why historical interpretations of these beings are so wildly fractured. Because, to be completely impartial here, if you look at the sources, ancient people were deeply divided on what the Nephilim actually were.
Very divided.
Like in Second Temple Judaism, which you can read in texts like the Book of 1 Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, they took the supernatural angle to the absolute extreme.
Oh yeah, they went all in.
The sons of God are explicitly identified as a group of rebellious angels called Watchers. They lust after human women, and the resulting Nephilim are portrayed as evil, bloodthirsty giants who literally consume the earth's resources, devour humanity, and corrupt the world so badly that God has no choice but to hit the reset button with the flood.
The Enochic literature treats them as a literal physical nightmare. It's ancient horror literature, really.
It sounds like it.
But if you look at the perspectives of later early church fathers and prominent Jewish commentaries, you see an aggressive pushback against that supernatural horror story.
They weren't buying it.
Not at all.
Right.
Thinkers like Julius Africanus or St. Augustine were deeply unsettled by the theological implications. To them, the idea that spiritual, immaterial angels could somehow possess physical bodies and commit physical sexual sins, it completely violated their philosophical framework.
Right, it breaks the rules of how angels are supposed to work.
Exactly. They needed a rational explanation. So they proposed that the sons of God were simply human beings from the righteous, godly lineage of Seth, and the daughters of men were human women from the unrighteous, violent lineage of Cain.
So under that interpretation, it wasn't a demonic invasion from the sky, it was just a catastrophic interfaith marriage.
That is the core of it, yeah. In this rationalist view, the Nephilim weren't supernatural monsters at all. They were simply the offspring of this corrupted human lineage. They grew up to become powerful, arrogant, and tyrannical human rulers.
Right.
They were legendary elite warriors who oppressed the local populations.
You know, applying that to how human society actually works, I have to wonder, could the Nephilim just be the ancient equivalent of a ruling aristocratic class?
How do you mean?
Well, we use size metaphors for power all the time. Today, we call billionaires titans of industry, or tech moguls giants. What if their giant status was entirely social, political, and economic rather than biological?
That's a great point.
If you are a peasant farmer, and a king has absolute unchecked power over your life, your family, and your land, that king, practically, is a giant to you. He dominates your horizon.
That is actually one of the most compelling theories in modern scholarship. Many archaeologists and biblical historians argue that the entire Nephilim narrative in Genesis was designed as a polemic.
The polemic against who?
Well, it was a deliberate theological critique weaponized against the epic tropes of heroism found in the surrounding ancient Near Eastern cultures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Israelites are looking across their borders at the celebrated, semi-divine culture heroes that the Mesopotamians and Canaanites worshipped. And they are reframing those heroes. They're saying, these guys aren't glorious saviors. They're arrogant, oppressive tyrants whose violence caused the ruin of the pre-flood world.
Okay, that changes the entire context.
Yeah.
Because if the Israelites are using the Nephilim as a political and theological critique against their neighbors, who exactly are they critiquing? Who are the big men across the border?
That is the million-dollar question.
And that brings us directly to Uruk, and one of the most famous literary figures in human history, Gilgamesh. And we know exactly how these ancient cultures were responding to each other because of an incredible archaeological find in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes, this is where the cross-cultural synthesis becomes undeniably clear. Among the thousands of scroll fragments discovered in the caves at Qumran, scholars identified an Aramaic text known as the Book of Giants.
Such a cool name for an ancient text.
It really is. Now, historians already knew this text existed in some form because centuries later, it was heavily used by the Manichaeans.
The Manichaeans?
Yeah, Manichaeism was a major religion in late antiquity that absorbed and blended myths from Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. The story of the giants was so viral and popular that fragments of this exact text were even found along the Silk Road in Turfan, China.
Wait, really? That far east?
Yes. But the Qumran discovery was groundbreaking because it proved that this text originated much earlier, deep within Second Temple Judaism, well before the 2nd century BC.
And the Book of Giants essentially acts as a sequel, or like an expansion to the Enoch story of the fallen angels. But it contains a massive, unexpected twist.
It really does.
The text actually lists the specific names of these monstrous giants. And right there on the list, it names Gilgamesh, along with the monster Humbaba.
The inclusion of those names is a breathtaking historical detail. The Jewish authors of this apocalyptic text deliberately lifted the greatest heroes and monsters from Mesopotamian literature, stripped them out of their original context, and dropped them right into Jewish theology.
That is so bold.
It is. They literally cast Gilgamesh as the demonic giant offspring of the fallen Watchers.
To understand why that is so wildly subversive, we have to look at who Gilgamesh was to his own people. According to our sources on the Epic of Gilgamesh, which traces back to Sumerian poems from around 2100 BCE, he was the legendary king of Uruk.
Right, a massive figure in their culture.
And the texts classify him as a Sumerian Lugal. When you translate Lugal, literally it means big man. And the epic aggressively emphasizes that he was not a normal human being.
No, the text insists he was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. His mother was the goddess Ninsun, and his father was an unnamed mortal high priest.
So he had the pedigree.
Exactly. And it's that exact boast of divine parentage that would have signaled to the Jewish authors of the Book of Giants that Gilgamesh fit the behavioral and biological profile of a Nephilim perfectly.
And his physical descriptions from the sources are just absurd. Like, we actually have a later Hittite version of the epic that lists his precise measurements. It claims his stature was 11 cubits tall, and his chest was 9 cubits wide.
Which is just staggering.
Yeah, if you calculate a cubit at roughly 18 inches, you are looking at a being over 16 feet tall with a chest 13 feet wide. He wasn't just tall, he was built like a prehistoric refrigerator.
That's a terrifying mental image.
Right, and the epic makes it clear that he used that massive size to be an absolute menace to his own people. He oppressed Oryuk, he exhausted the young men in endless, brutal tests of strength, and he claimed the brides of the city on their wedding nights.
It was completely out of control.
His tyranny was so absolute that the people actually cried out to the gods for relief, which prompted the creation of the wild man Enkidu to finally challenge him. But wait, I have to process this. They took Mesopotamia's greatest cultural hero, a king who builds walls and slays monsters, and turned him into a demonic villain.
That's exactly what they did.
That is essentially ancient copyright infringement. It's like a subjugated nation taking Superman today and writing a globally viral story where Superman is actually a bloodthirsty demon just despite his original creators. How does that happen?
It's brilliant psychological warfare, is what it is. You have to consider the power dynamics of the time. The Jewish people were repeatedly conquered, exiled, and subjugated by these colossal Mesopotamian empires, first the Assyrians, then the Babylonians.
Right, they were under their thumb for centuries.
Exactly. And those empires revered figures like Gilgamesh as the pinnacle of human achievement and the divine right of kings. By taking Gilgamesh and categorizing him as an evil Nephilim, the authors of the Book of Giants are executing a profound theological subversion.
They're flipping the script.
Precisely. They are stripping the superpower of its glory. They are telling their oppressors, "You're great semi-divine heroes. They aren't the saviors of civilization. They are the corrupt, demonic offspring of fallen angels, and our God drowned them all in the flood."
Wow.
It is a marginalized people asserting spiritual supremacy over the empire that enslaved them.
That perfectly explains the texts and the theology. It's so fascinating. But what happens when we step out of the mythological texts and into the physical dirt?
Archaeology.
Right. We have to transition from the realm of giant myths to giant evidence. Because this isn't just a story about ancient literature. It's a story tied to the grounded, stone and bone archaeology of the biblical era. Which brings us to the most famous giant of them all, Goliath.
Goliath of Gath is arguably the most recognizable giant in global literature. In the biblical narrative of 1 Samuel, he serves as the ultimate champion of the Philistine army, stepping out to terrorize the Israelites until he is famously defeated by David with a sling.
Everyone knows that story.
Right. And the text explicitly records his height as 6 cubits and a span which would place him at over 9 feet tall.
And crucially, the text links Goliath directly back to those ancient giant clans we've been talking about. He is associated with the Rephaim, and by extension, the Anakim and the original Nephilim. He is presented as one of the very last remnants of this terrifying ancient lineage.
Yes, a holdover from another age.
And for a long time, people treated this as just a nice moral fable about the underdog winning. But then, modern archaeologists started excavating a site called Tel Es-Safi.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. Tel Es-Safi is almost universally accepted by archaeologists as the physical site of biblical Gath, which was Goliath's hometown.
Okay.
Excavations there have been intense and ongoing for over 2 decades. Initially, they were uncovering a very rich, sophisticated Philistine culture dating to the 9th and 10th centuries BCE. But in 2019, the excavators dug deeper, plunging into the layer below those ruins, and what they found completely upended their understanding of the city's scale.
They uncovered an older, massive 11th century BCE city, didn't they?
They did.
And the defining feature of this older layer was what archaeologists term cyclopean masonry. The physical stones used to build the fortifications were extraordinarily massive, and the walls themselves were built twice as thick as any normal city in Levant during that time period.
It was completely anomalous.
Yeah, everything was constructed on a scale that was completely disproportionate to regular human needs.
The implications of that discovery are staggering. The lead archaeologists excavating Gath propose that these colossal, abnormally large structures might actually be the physical origin of the Goliath myth.
That makes so much sense.
Right. Building cyclopean walls requires immense, terrifying social organization and labor. It serves as a profound psychological deterrent. When later generations of Israelites, who were largely a pastoral, nomadic people at the time, looked up at these massive, impenetrable fortifications, they had to rationalize them.
Because they couldn't build them themselves?
Exactly. They likely concluded that the people who built walls that large must have been proportionally massive themselves.
If you are an ancient nomad living in a tent, and you stumble upon these cyclopean stone walls of Gath, it would be exactly like a person from the 1700s walking into modern-day Manhattan and staring up at a skyscraper.
That's a great comparison.
The sheer scale would break your brain. You would absolutely assume the builders had to be 20 feet tall just to stack the stones. It's fascinating to think that the monumental architecture actually birthed the myth of the giant. If a city gate is 12 feet high, you naturally assume a 12-foot guy is walking through it.
Architecture absolutely acts as an anchor for mythology. But the sources reveal that it wasn't just the oversized buildings that mark these Philistine elites as giants. There was a highly specific, deeply biological trait associated with the Rephaim in the ancient Levant polydactylism.
Which is the medical term for having extra fingers and toes.
Precisely. Polydactylism is an inherited genetic abnormality that results in an excess of digits. And while it sounds fantastical, it is a well-documented genetic reality, particularly in geographically or socially isolated communities.
And royal families definitely fit that bill.
Oh, without a doubt. Royal or elite warrior clans in the ancient world were notoriously insular. They intermarried extensively to keep their bloodlines and their power concentrated.
Right.
When you have that level of genetic bottlenecking, recessive traits like polydactylism can easily become amplified and fixed within a specific family line.
And the incredible thing is that this genetic reality shows up right in the biblical text. If you read 2 Samuel 21, it recounts a later battle where David's nephew, Jonathan, engages in single combat with a giant who was descended from the Rephaim.
It's a very specific passage.
Yeah, the author of the text goes completely out of their way to record a very bizarre specific detail. This giant warrior had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. 24 digits in total.
Which is such an odd thing to mention.
Right. Why on earth would an ancient writer invent that specific medical detail unless it was a known, recognizable physical trademark of these elite fighters?
It serves as a biological reality check amidst the mythology. And we actually have physical archaeological backing for this genetic anomaly in the region.
Oh, we do?
Yes. At a site called Deir el-Balah, located near Gaza, excavators discovered a series of clay sarcophagi dating to the 13th century BC. They were constructed by the local elite in a quasi-Egyptian style.
Okay, interesting.
One of these sarcophagi, which is now housed in the Israel Museum, features a highly detailed lid depicting the deceased. And the man carved into the clay clearly deliberately has 6 fingers on his left hand.
That is wild.
The archaeologists noted that another sarcophagus from the same site also appeared to be designed to show a polydactylous individual.
That completely bridges the gap between folklore and biology. It grounds the terror of the giants in something observable. Because if you are an Israelite soldier and you know there is an elite family of massive Philistine warriors who have intermarried for generations, a trait like having 6 fingers becomes the terrifying trademark of that clan.
It's like a brand.
Exactly. If you are on the battlefield and you see a massive guy gripping a spear with 6 fingers, you know exactly who his grandfather was, and you know you are in serious trouble.
It was a visual marker of their intimidating legacy. In fact, throughout the ancient Near East, Mesopotamian priests and omen readers carefully recorded instances of polydactylism. It was widely recognized as a phenomenon that held deep, often ominous significance.
It wasn't just a party trick.
Not at all. It wasn't just a myth. It was a biological marker of otherness that confirmed these elite families were different from regular people.
So if we step back and look at this massive tapestry fallen, angels, Sumerian kings built like brick houses, massive cyclopean walls, and 6-fingered Philistine warriors. What is the through line here? What does all this ancient history mean for you today?
Well, the sources reveal a very profound universal human tendency. Regardless of the century or the culture, humans constantly project ideas of greatness, divine right, and pure terror onto physical size.
We still do it today, honestly.
We do. In the ancient world, political power and physical presence were deeply, inextricably linked. The big men of history, whether you call them Lugals, Rephaim, or Nephilim, they were undeniably real in terms of their outsized power, their military dominance, and their oppressive influence over everyday people.
Right. Even if their literal physical height was wildly exaggerated through the telephone game of history and translation, their impact on the human psyche was giant. When an elite, aristocratic ruling class demands your grain, forces your sons into labor, and claims your daughters, they loom over your life like a monster. Whether it's the mythological Gilgamesh crushing the young men of Uruk, or the very real Goliath mocking a terrified army from the shadow of cyclopean walls, these stories are simply how ancient people processed power that felt too massive and too entrenched to fight.
And understanding that mechanism forces us to look differently at how we interpret the past, the physical traces these cultures left behind, the impossibly thick stone walls of Gath, or the genetic quirks like polydactylism preserved on a clay coffin. They served as the anchors for the mythology.
They started from a seed of truth.
Exactly. The myths grew larger than life, but they were originally seated in the brutal, awe-inspiring reality of human experience.
It's entirely about how human beings desperately try to make sense of things that are bigger than themselves, which leads to a final, absolutely fascinating angle to ponder that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
It's the best part. We've talked about architecture-inspiring myths and genetics-inspiring myths, but what about the literal physical bones of the giants? because throughout recorded history, people have sworn they actually found the skeletons of the Nephilim.
It happens over and over again in the historical record.
But what if those bones weren't exaggerated enemy warriors at all? What happens when ancient mythology collides with paleontology?
It is one of the most fascinating phenomena. The misidentification of prehistoric fossils as the remains of mythological giants is incredibly well documented.
Yes. The sources mention this incredible event in 1705. A massive petrified bone was discovered in Albany, New York,
Right.
and the famous Puritan minister Cotton Mather examined it and publicly, confidently declared it to be the absolute proof of the Nephilim, a giant who had perished in Noah's flood.
And he was entirely serious.
Oh, deadly serious. Generations later, paleontologists identified it as the bone of a prehistoric mastodon. And that wasn't an isolated incident. More than a century earlier, in 1577, locals uncovered massive bones near Lucerne, Switzerland.
And the authorities attributed them to a 19-foot-tall antediluvian giant, right?
Exactly. It wasn't until decades later that the emerging scientific community realized those bones actually belonged to a woolly mammoth.
It perfectly illustrates how human mythology stretches to accommodate the unknown natural world.
Now, take that phenomenon and project it thousands of years into the past. Imagine you are a wandering ancient shepherd in the Near East. You are walking through a dry riverbed, and a flash flood has just eroded the bank, uncovering a femur the size of a tree trunk.
Just sticking right out of the mud.
Right. It's the petrified leg bone of a dinosaur, or a mammoth. You don't have the scientific vocabulary for paleontology. You only have the terrifying stories your grandfather told you around the fire about the sons of God, the Watchers, and the giants who ruled the earth before the Great Flood. If you look down at that massive petrified bone in the sand, wouldn't you absolutely, without a single shadow of a doubt, believe that the Nephilim were real?
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching a Moment in Time podcast.